Hello, Jerry and I welcome you to Soulprint Intuitive Tarot. It is March 5th. So, Jerry's here because he wants to let you know that every single one of your birthday and anniversary wishes have been received and so appreciated. And the other human in the house, Vanessa, who was also celebrating her birthday, again, thanks you for your lovely best wishes. So Jerry says, yeah, so that Super Tuesday was pretty interesting. So I think we're going to take a look at that. Yeah? Okay. Are you done? I think he's done. All right. Toodles. Good boy. All right. Now, the last time I did that with him, I was picking hair out of my face for the next 12 hours. So let's hope I have weathered this thing unscathed. Okay, so here we go. So Super Tuesday, very interesting. You've got people pulling out all over the place before, after. And so really what it looks like is you have a race that is starting to look like it's definitely going to be like a two-man race for the Democratic nomination. And I maintain that I'm not going to do readings on either of them until there is a nomination, and then we'll start looking very seriously at what that looks like and how that's going to unfold. But I do want to take a look at how Trump is doing, because so as things sit right now, the delegates, or not the delegates, but the men going forward for this nomination sort of fall into two very distinct categories in Trump's head. One is with Mr. Sanders, that, you know, he really wants him to win that nomination because, right or wrong, he feels that he's going to be easier to beat because he can start screaming socialism, socialism, you know, from the treetops. So there's that. And then the other side is Mr. Biden. And that's creating a bit of a problem for Trump, because he understands on some level that fundamentally he is much more well-liked and much more well-received than Trump could ever be in his fantastical dreams that, you know, he has. And he also is understanding that he's been trying for about a year now to just like destroy this guy. It got him impeached, but he won't let up. So it's interesting because it's putting Trump in a position where, in some ways, it's almost like he feels threatened from both sides, right? Because if he overplays the socialist hand, that could really, really backfire against him. And frankly, if he attacks Joe Biden with any sort of real significance and seriousness going forward, that's not going to go so well for him either, because he's already done that for a year and it didn't turn out well, and people are just going to say, God already, I wish he would shut up about it. So very curious, not to mention the fact that he is lying through his teeth about the virus that's flying around and telling everybody that there's going to be a vaccine in a couple of months, and that's just flat not true. The interest rate has been dropped in an attempt to stabilize the markets. I think the fact that, you know, it really technically is down to two nominees in the Democratic Party is also moving towards stabilizing the economy a little bit, because it doesn't feel quite so scary as it did when you have that whole range of people. But that's not going well for him. So where is it that we can figure out that something's actually going well for him? So let's take a look and see if we can figure that out. And the other thing I'm going to be really, really interested to find out in this reading, and I'm going to sort of set the intention that if there's anything that they, you know, that they can tell us that I want to know what's going on with Barr and Giuliani in connection to how Trump is doing right now. All right, so come on down. I have a question. I think we're going to give that one more shuffle. Yeah, okay. So, Trump's current state. Trump's current state. Trump's current state. Okay, well, that's not really an auspicious beginning. Okay. So, there is some recognition, and perhaps not necessarily with him specifically, but certainly with people who are surrounding him. Not when they're speaking to him, not when they're conversing with him, etc., but in their own private minds and moments, where they're really starting to recognize that, you know what, he really is on a very precarious edge, okay? And it's not going to take very much for him to misstep and just take a huge tumble. The problem is, because he was never reined in with all of the other missteps, they're not exactly sure how they're supposed to do it, because he has been allowed to not listen to anybody who advises him, anybody. And so now it's going to be very, very difficult for these people to step in and say, well, okay, yeah, except now we're going to advise you, because he's not going to take that very well. And he's going to get even more defensive, frankly, than he already is, even more paranoid, even more convinced that the entire globe is out to get him. Up to and creating a virus that's killing people because it's going to make him look bad, right? So there's kind of that hodgepodge going on. Yeah, I do have my smoky quartz here. And so what we're going to see is we're going to see a ramped up attempt to recontrol the narrative, right? For a little while there, a couple of days, he was really, frankly, kind of ready and willing to let the whole Democratic nomination thing kind of take front page, because it took the heat off of him and his administration that does not appear to be really very well equipped to handle with everything that's going on. So what it did was it bought him a little bit of time in the press where things could go a little bit more quiet and allow for a little bit perhaps of recovery time. So you're going to see where that message continues to get spun, right? Part of what is going against him, okay, part of why, no matter how hard he spins, he's not going to be able to spin it to a point where it sort of does him any good. It's because this is impacting so many other countries, and so many other countries are stepping up to the plate. They're dumping in all kinds of money. They're being as transparent as they possibly can be in terms of the status of this and how people are doing and how people are not doing. So he not only looks bad in relation to how other presidents have handled these kinds of health crises, but he also looks bad in comparison to other country leaders. And that, of course, is just putting him into a wee little bit, of a spin. And you got to remember with him, right? His whole modus operandi, the way he handles things, the way he repeats, is in his world, it is all about a very forceful and loud message and communication that doesn't necessarily have to bear any resemblance to the truth, but it does have to be repeated forcefully and over and over and over again, because he understands that there is certainly a certain section of people who want to believe the fallacy. They want to believe the story because for some reason it makes them feel validated in some way. You know, nobody wants to just flat say, yeah, you know what, I supported the guy who's wrecking the country, right? So they need these little bits and pieces, often known as red meat, to keep their focus on him, because he knows there's a certain segment of the population that he can count on and trust to stand behind him pretty much no matter what. So that's the headspace that he comes from, and that's the only headspace he comes from. So, and as the writing sort of continues to be written on the wall, if you will, you're going to see, again, more extreme behavior and a volatility that you probably haven't seen to date. Certainly people in the inner circle, certainly people in the administration, in the White House, they have seen that volatility. But publicly, it's been reined in, and I think going forward, you're really going to see him unleashed, and it's everything he has to say is going to be about the past. Everything. So you're going to start hearing again about the election and how he won the election, and everybody said he didn't have a path for victory, and look at what he did, and yak, 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 yak. Get your headphones or your earplugs like ready, because really that's all he has, right? That's really all he can do is brag about how he got where he got, because frankly there really isn't a lot to brag about in terms of what he has done since he has been in office. And again, for all of those people who thought it was a fabulous idea that he slash and cut and burn down agencies within the government, I think that many of them are, again, being given an interesting opportunity to reevaluate whether that exactly was the way to go, because literally some of the agencies and organizations that you need up and running full steam ahead have been gutted to the point that before they can even think about getting up, never mind running, they've got to fill in all the holes. So there's definitely, you're going to see more and more this sort of throwback to past glories with him. And to the point where even some of his supporters at rallies are going to say, this is literally a replay of 2016. We have heard all of this stuff before. There's really nothing new for him to hang his hat on, especially with the fact that despite everything that he had been doing and pushing the Federal Reserve to do in terms of the economy, with all of that already in place, you can see where, given a crisis of the magnitude that the world is dealing with now, the stock market could not sustain it, and it needed to come down and go into this sort of corrective mode. And, you know, when you're talking about health, for example, people aren't going to be so quick to go out and up their spending, right? Which is exactly what you hope will happen as you drop the interest rates. You want to stimulate the economy. You want to get people going, oh, wow, this is a great rate. Now I can buy a car. Now I can buy a house because the interest rate is so good. But if you're not sure how scary this virus is going to become, and they're saying, really, you're not going to actually have any clarity on that for the next 2 or 3 weeks. So that being the case, people are not going to go out and start spending lavishly to boost the economy because they're too concerned about literally what the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 months looks like. Okay. All right. So this is part of how the president manages to some degree, kind of keep it together. And these are very interesting cards, and I will tell you who they represent. Bill Barr. The strength that Trump has within the Justice Department to really manipulate situations, and go after people who are his political rivals. And let me tell you, if he blatantly continues to do that, there's going to be significant pushback, because everybody on some level really did understand that what he did with the whole Burisma thing and the whole Ukrainian, investigation and the Russian thing, everybody understands that that was really not fair game playing. And while there's always some in a group who want to cut corners and cheat, there is also that segment of the population that says, you know what, you don't get to use government agencies against the very people who are running against you. That's not how exactly it works in this country. So if Bill Barr sort of does too much publicly, or it becomes very blatant that he's going to investigate Bernie and his socialist ties, and he's going to investigate Joe Biden and his Ukrainian Burisma ties, both of which I think are probably fallacy, there really is going to be some significant pushback. Does that mean that Bill Barr's not going to do it? No. What it means is he's going to try to do it quietly. And this card is representing Giuliani, because he is behind the scenes and he continues to work diligently as the president's lawyer. So basically what you have is the two lawyers surrounding him and going into a rather intense protective mode, particularly as he seems to be at a very high state of vulnerability, agitation. He's not really feeling even himself that he is on solid ground. So part of what gives him that sense of security is the fact that he's got these two, fighting the good fight for him as he sees it. So Giuliani's been surprisingly quiet lately. And you know what? We have learned from past examples that when he gets quiet, that's actually when you have to be very concerned about what is going on, because he's quiet because he's doing stuff that's not going to be well received, that's going to cast a negative light on Trump. And so he's being a little bit more quiet, a little bit more reserved, but make no mistake, he is very busy in the background doing everything he can to find information that can be used to change the public's perception in a way that will suit Donald Trump in terms of his re-election. Okay, so there really is that sense that Giuliani's out there continuing to, and it's not even dig up dirt as much as it's manufacture dirt. And so again, he's quiet. That is not necessarily a good thing, okay? And now you have the Wheel of Fortune showing up. So, honestly, who does that apply to? Seriously. Well, it's going to apply to Trump. It's going to apply to Barr. And it's going to apply to Giuliani. So I would suggest that there are some very turbulent times ahead, because he's going to discover that sort of that infrastructure that he has around him in terms of legal representation, the people that he listens to, although doesn't hear or react as if he's listened to them, but whatever. They're going to find themselves in more and more of a sort of slippery slope that being the case, that's going to create even more instability as he starts to feel as if even his firewalls of lawyers are really not able to control the narrative in the direction he wants it controlled. There really, really is a sense that he is just, he's starting to recognize that there is very, very little wiggle room. And, you know, going forward, he's going to have some really, frankly, good feathers up his sleeves in terms of, you know, sort of the technology part of the election. Frankly, the interference from outside of the United States in the election. So he has some things that he's sort of basically counting on, right? But what he's discovering is that the spotlight is too intense and everybody is watching. And because everybody is watching, he's finding himself in a place where it's kind of the more aggressive and unhinged he behaves, the more people around him are trying to contain him. I do notice that there are not a lot of Trump people out there saying, let Trump be Trump, because they've come to the conclusion that letting Trump be Trump really doesn't show him in a light that allows anybody to believe that he that the things he does is for the good of others, right? And so the more of that becomes on display, the more almost like friction you have between what he says and how he behaves versus the words that he is trying to promote, you know, as he moves towards this election. So, yeah, so there we go. That's sort of interesting. Yeah, it's just going to continue, you know. There is so much volatility behind the scenes that in some ways we really should just actually be grateful for the fact that we don't have to witness it and we don't have to hear it. The tweets and things like that are such a tiny microcosm of what is actually happening. And so there's a lot of people who are rushing to sort of put out the fire, but instead of using a fire hose, they're kind of running around with like a sand bucket. Okay, not even a real bucket that big people would use, but literally a plastic bucket that children would use to, you know, put sand in at the beach. So they're really ill-equipped to put out these fires that he continues to start because, again, the more frightened he becomes, the less secure he feels, the more volatile the situation. For right now, take comfort from the fact that the volatility appears to fundamentally be contained behind closed doors. So, and I'm not saying that that there is no volatility showing. Of course there is. But what I'm saying is the lion's share of it really does seem to be happening behind the scenes where we're not privy to it. We don't have to witness it. And you know what, honestly, that's a really good thing, because with everything being so in such a state of upheaval right now, we don't really need more of that. And so even though it sounds really insane for me to say these words, I literally am hearing, enjoy the calm before the storm. So if this is considered the calm, God help us when the storm comes. Ooh. And it's going to be a pretty darn big storm. It really is. And things are going to crumble and things are going to be brought to their knees. And it's just not going to go well. I mean, it's really not. We have seen so much upheaval. You know, there was the Mueller report. There was the impeachment. And, you know, the investigation in the House went one way, and then when it got to the Senate, that was just sort of blown up. So we have seen so many times where momentum starts to build, where this tower looks like it is absolutely inevitable, and then somehow it gets pulled back. And I'm not saying that this time is any different, but what I am saying and what you need to realize is every time that tower gets really, really shaky, and maybe it doesn't collapse, but it sure does get shaky. It is weakening the very foundation of which this ridiculous empire of his has been built. And so at some point, it is going to have no foundation left. The foundation is getting weaker and weaker all the time. And at some point, you really can expect a big crash. So, okay, so this is the Trump card, so it's going to sit over here above the tower. And so what is the Ace of Pentacles and the Star card telling us? What the message that is being given with these two cards really does have to do with a reassurance that there are going to be funds, there is going to be strategies, there is going to be momentum in place from either or both at this, point, sort of races, right? So there's going to be enough going on and enough exposure for both candidates on the Democratic side that they really are going to be able, you're going to see his wish really crumbling, and the wish connected to the American people and the divine feminine really taking shape and growing in momentum and growing strength, and just amazing that moving forward. And here we go again. Okay, so it is, as I've said before, it is just never a good thing when these three cards show up in a reading, right? You've got a card representing him. You have the Devil, the Tower, and Death. Not great cards. Not great cards at all. And the Wall, this is cool. The wall of support that he believes he has built is in a lot more shakier ground than he actually thinks it is. So, you know what? Yeah, it's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride, and you're going to see more and more of this this sort of attitude of what can you do for me before I do anything for you? And as that continues to be made public, it's not going to reflect well on him, because it is just far too mercenary, frankly, an attitude to work well in a democracy. So for right now, I want to say that in some way, it doesn't matter which direction he turns in. It doesn't matter kind of exactly where he looks. There's definitely a sense that the blocks and the pushback are building momentum against him. And he doesn't really have some of the strength going forward that he actually wants people to believe he has. And remember, the star is a really lovely omen that things that are going to unfold in a way that I think the vast majority of Americans are going to be pleased with. All right, so thank you so very, very much. I'm going to remind you once again, with everything that's going on, please check your subscriptions. Please check that you have the bell turned on so that you get notifications if that is something that you wish to happen. And I continue to be very grateful for your support and all of the energy and time that you have put into the Soulprint group and helping both channels grow. So I thank you ever so much. And once again, I thank you very, very much for all of the not only anniversary wishes for Soulprint Tarot and Soulprint Insight, but for the birthday wishes. They really are just so lovely to receive, and I thank you very, very much for them. Until next time, take care, be well, and I'll see you soon. Bye.